Welcome. My name is Natasha Sherman, and I am your host. My guest today is the Reverend Stephen M. Rozzelle. Stephen has been an Episcopal priest in the Episcopal Church for nearly 50 years. He retired in 2006, and after flunking retirement, Stephen came out of retirement.
Yes.
Over the years, he has received numerous awards, many in recognition of his contribution in addressing the issue of hunger in New Jersey. Stephen is considered to be very creative with his sermons, accompanied by a tremendous sense of humor. He is someone who is present to the needs of his congregation and welcomes each and every one entering the church, especially members of the gay community. Today, he is here to share perspectives from his upcoming book titled A Life Designed, Not Resigned. Welcome.
Yes, thank you, Natasha.
Yeah, it's good to have you. So, your book is rich with ideas, and each chapter ends with spiritual exercises and reflections.
Yes.
And, I don't care what your religion is, it's all about a spiritual component.
Yes,
yeah.
yes.
So I'm going to read excerpts from the book and ask you questions about it.
Good.
So chapter 1 is about context and starts with the sentence, context is everything. So say something about that.
Yes, often what you see with presentation of any religion, but I'm going to focus on the Christian one, is they do, in my mind, serious damage to the journey by not considering the context. And the gay issue is a big one, by the way, because in the Bible, homosexuality is an abomination, Leviticus, and that was the context at the time. And when you don't consider the context, then it's very judgmental about certain types of people. But if you read a little further, after homosexual is abomination, you find that it condones slavery, and you can't touch anything made of pigskin, like a football, and that. The context is crucial in just being present to the Bible and presenting it. And when I don't consider the context, then I use the Bible as evidence to be judgmental of other people. That's what that's about, making me better than you because A, B, C, and D. Context. Now, you can prove anything in the Bible you want to if you take it out of context. And I use the example, Jesus said, you think I've come to bring peace? No, I've come to bring a sword. Mother against father. If the first thing he said after the resurrection was, peace be with you. But if I didn't consider the context, it would be justification for killing somebody else. So context, and that's what I love about the Episcopal Church, it considers the context. When I don't consider the context, then it becomes used to be judgmental of everybody. That's not like me. Which is
the same, with a lot of religion.
Yes.
Yeah.
Your Orthodox tend, your fundamentalist of any church, Orthodox tend to be not consider the context. And you can prove anything you want to in the Bible if you take it out of context.
Yeah.
Yeah,
so one of the things I want to ask you about, I'm going to read, because you just said this, but when I live from the context, no good or not good enough, which I dare say most of us experience at one time or another, and we're talking about original sin. How do I create my worth? By making myself better than you. Being judgmental of others is a deceptive way to bring worth to myself. When I live in fear of a punishing God, my soul is shaking. When I'm in awe of God, it produces a completely distinct way of being that brings life to me and a renewed sense of commitment to a loving God. So let's talk a little about original sin and context.
Well, original sin, shortly, God made the world and everything in it, human beings, everything was good. And then he told Adam not to eat from a particular tree. And God comes to Adam and says, what's this I hear about you, Adam? And Adam goes, oh, Eve made me do it. And God goes to Eve, and Eve, what's this I hear about you, Eve? And Eve said, oh, the serpent made me do it. And then God says, for this you'll be punished. Now, I know God was upset with the disobedience, but the original sin is the lie about it. It's like being disobedient. That's not original with any one of us, okay? But the cover-up about something is always worse than the initial infraction. And so original sin, why would I blame you? Why would I, because in the moment it's not my fault, I get my worth back. And so original sin, and this is just another interpretation, is holding myself as having little or no worth, or I use the expression not good enough. I dare say we've all been there at one time or another, and it is original. It's a story that we've made up about ourselves because of whatever infractions that we had. So when I'm enveloped in the context of no good or not good enough, then my life becomes like a reaction to that. And like you said, how do I create my worth? By making me better than you, okay, homosexual, African American, fill in the blank. Or by bragging about myself, I've done it the best in the history of the world. All right, that's how I create my worth. But underneath, it comes from having little or no worth, and that's how.
So, if I understand it correctly,
yes.
Okay. So, some religions or people who teach religion,
yes.
The idea is you're born as a sinner. So again, if you're living in that context, your life will be about hiding that
yes.
you're not worthwhile,
yes.
and also then using others, putting down others in order to create your own worth.
Yes.
As opposed to, the way I understand it is you're describing the eating of the apple was not the big deal. It was the blaming somebody else,
yes.
not being accountable.
The lie.
Yeah.
Yes. That's underneath the eating the apple. Well, it's like, again, eating the apple, yes, was disobedient.
Right.
But underneath that, the lie about it, the cover-up I use.
Yes.
The cover-up, I say, is always worse than the initial infraction. That, like
yeah.
I said, is deep. It digs a deeper hole. But the cover-up is always, if you just say yes, then it takes. But when I cover up about it, yeah. there's a bigger story.
Well, you live on top of that lie.
Yes.
I found this, and it was written by a Native American. I was very young when someone called me sinner. I got curious
yeah.
because in our language there is no such word.
Yes.
So I decided to ask my grandfather about it. He
yes.
said, there is no such thing.
Oh.
Our consciousness does not recognize this kind of words because it was made to manipulate and put guilt in our hearts.
Yes.
There are no sins. What we have is choices.
Yes, I like
and
that.
sometimes we make mistakes.
Yes.
Fear is what people use to take away your freedom. Do not allow anybody to do this to you.
Yes, that's very good. That's
yeah.
very good. Again, miserable sinner is the context that the church often, gives to us. And when you're told that over and over and over and over, you start believing that. And what's very interesting, and mostly Roman Catholics, have you ever confessed the same sin to God more than once? They go, of course. And I say to them, it suggests that you have not accepted God's forgiveness. And they go, oh my God, I've had priests tell me, I never thought of that. But that's just kind of playing the game, right? And use some integrity. Or don't confess at all, use some integrity. I mean, okay, if you're not honest with God, who are you going to be honest with, please? So.
One of the things that you wrote in your book was about accepting, and you just touched on it,
yes.
accepting God's unconditional love.
Yes. Yes.
So if I am walking out in the world operating from, I have God's unconditional love,
yes.
how does that show up differently than trying to make up for all my sins?
Well, because one is focused on your past, okay, and it took me a long time to distinguish the voice that speaks to it, 57 years. And this occurred to me, and I never do it at the time, but there's a calling. When you're a clergy, there's a calling. It's very exciting, energetic, and I say that's God's voice. It's like presents the possibility of a wonderful future. But there's another voice that speaks to you that says, wait a minute, Stephen, you stole $20 from your dad that he actually put in church collection. You can't be a priest. People would laugh you. And here's the difficult thing. God says, I love you unconditionally. Trust me. And the devil goes, wait a minute. I got evidence for what a schmuck you are. Okay.
Okay.
And also I say the Bible presents God in two different ways. And I'm wondering, Jesus was born, I'm going to say, into a religion that was the good old boys club. Okay? Women weren't allowed, and they established all the rules. And we're rich because God has blessed us, and you're blind because you did something wrong and God has punished you. Okay, and Jesus, in my mind, shifted the whole spiritual journey from the head to the heart. Operate from your heart. But God is presented in two distinct different ways. I'm going to punish you for being wicked. And there's lots of evidence for that. But there's another way that's very different, which is. If you, Lord, were to keep track of our sinfulness, who could stand? And so, and Paul emphasizes this in his doctrine called grace, unconditional love. And for me, if in a lot of the Old Testament, if the love of God is conditional, well, that's not love. Okay.
So what do I do with those conflicting voices? How do I recontextualize them?
It's very good. So you notice one is focused on the kingdom's always presented as something at hand or in front of us. And if you notice that nasty voice is all the indiscretions of your past, I talk back to that voice now. I use it. Thank you for reminding me who I belong to. And it's not you, sucker. And I say it exactly like that. Thank you for reminding me who I belong to. And it's not you. Which is, again, restores my focus in front of me instead of, and back of me. One of the things Episcopalians, by and large, don't memorize a lot of scripture, but there's two of my favorites. One is, don't judge. Jesus said, don't judge, all right? And the other thing that Jesus said that's very useful in our lives, Jesus said, whoever has his hand to the plow and looks back isn't fit for the kingdom. And all that nasty stuff, that voice, that's in our past, okay? Yes, and so I can hold on to the past as evidence of how awful I am, or I actually use that, thank you for a lesson in life that you wanted me to learn, God. Thank you for a lesson in life. I think, and I say this, failure is our best teacher. Because I often see, like with acolytes in church, they don't pay any attention to what they're doing until they make a mistake. And then they don't do that again because they learn from the mistake, the failure, if you will. So the failure of my past, I can hold on to it as evidence for how awful I am as a human being, and then I'm fixated on myself and what's the matter with me and what's the matter with you, or I can let that go in a way that I'm focused on how can I reinvent myself, recreate myself to be joyful in God's Spirit in the world. And I can't do that when I'm focused on the evidence of my past and the devil speaking to me all the time, okay?
So what's really great about that is, so first of all, you're not saying, oh, I did it, so what? It doesn't matter. You're saying, oh, I did that, I probably shouldn't have. Again, is there some way I can, clean things up?
Yes.
And if not,
yes.
It's not about walking down the street and whipping yourself.
No, right.
It's about, okay, well, there's a future to create. How can I do it differently?
And thank you, God, for loving me unconditionally. Thank you.
Yeah.
That's the big one. Thank you for loving me. And until I accept that and own it, then I'm haunted. I'm haunted by my past.
Yeah. Because if you own being loved unconditionally,
yes.
You're not spending your life defending something.
Exactly right. God, I confess, yes, I did that, and God, you are such a loving God, you have forgiven me, which when I accept your forgiveness, it propels me to be your spirit in the world and to live my life as a gift, looking for ways to bring joy to others.
It's a whole different perspective.
Oh, yes.
From guilt,
oh,
and,
yes.
and
yeah.
punishment.
And we're taught that.
Yeah.
We're taught that by the church, disobedient, you're bad, you're bad, you're bad. Even the words I use, the words about unworthy, I take that word out, undeserving. Yes, we're undeserving. That makes God's love even, more powerful. But unworthy is like, that's more of that.
Yeah, it's like, it's awful.
Yes,
I mean, if you're starting at the starting gate unworthy, it's like, what's the point?
And you know what, Natasha, I pay attention to words. And there's a theme in the Bible called atonement, which Jesus died for my sins. And the vision I get about that is you and I being in the stadium Jesus is on the playing field, and you and I applauding Jesus for something he did 2,000 years ago. The Jesus that I get says to me, I don't want your applause, I want you on the field playing the game. That's what makes a difference. And so when I give communion to people, the prayer book says, take this in remembrance that Christ died for you, atonement. I don't say that. Take this in remembrance that Christ lives in you. And people come alive in the moment. It's like, oh, yes.
Yes. Wow.
Okay.
And it is just a shift in words.
And I pay attention. There's some words we use. Sometimes when we memorize things, we don't pay attention to them. And I recently brought this to attention. I studied it. Lead us not into temptation. God does not tempt us. That's disgusting. That's the devil's job. God tests us. Yes, we're tested, but tempt us. And so I asked my secretary to Google that, and the Pope had brought up the exact same issue to the Vatican Council and got overruled. The exact same issue. So it's like, lead us away from temptation. Lead us into temptation. Lead us not into temptation. Please don't. That's disgusting. And there's another interpretation of it. It's like, well, guide us to make right choices when we come to, those moments in our lives. I like that. Guide us to make the right choices.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Yes. So I wanted to ask you. Yes. So when my context is one of not good enough, miserable sinner, disobedient child, my focus is glued on some version of what's wrong.
Yes.
When my context is that of beloved child of God, my focus shifts from what's wrong to what's next.
Yes.
How then can I design myself as God's gift in the world? By declaring my life is a gift from God, designed to bring forth joy to the other.
And Jesus said that, I have come to bring joy, all right? And it's very exciting, by the way. So I've reinvented my life, if you will, to be it's to create joy. And so everywhere I go, I bought an Audi a year ago, and in the 3 hours I was waiting for all the paperwork, I talked to all the employees, and they all loved their job. And they weren't micromanaged, So I wrote Paul Miller a letter, probably a billionaire, and I said, I just want you to know that starts from the top. When all your employees, in the 3 hours I waited for the paperwork, that's a reflection of your presence in their life, Paul Miller. And he called me back and said he cried when he got there. He invited me to his office. And I have this in the book too. A couple months ago I was following a blue truck, and on the back of it said 1-800 how am I driving, and I followed it for like 20 minutes. I called the company to compliment. I don't know who the driver was, but they used their blinkers, they let people go in front, they were in the right lane, and they were stunned. No one had ever called this company with a compliment before, only to complain. And that's what we pay attention to. We pay attention when something's off. To complain about it. And I remember my kids growing up, I use this in the book, I never noticed when they went to bed on time. Let's say their bedtime was 9 o'clock. I never noticed when they went to bed at 9 o'clock to say thank you. I always noticed when they didn't, to chastise them. More of you're bad, okay? And so behavior tends to show up when it's off. All right. Yes.
And again, this whole business of recontextualizing things, I want you to, and I read this in the book, so the Jehovah's Witnesses came to your house.
Yes. They came to our house, and I think they're anti-gay, and they would tend to be more on the fundamentalist side, okay? And so they gave me their spiel, and I didn't agree with a single word they said. But I don't listen for that. I don't listen for agreement anymore. That's another way of disguising of make people wrong. When I'm listening for agreement, and especially in the political, context, and I didn't agree with a single word they said, but I was awed by these two men who go door to door sharing their message when 99% of the people shut the door in their face. What empowered me was their courage and their commitment to go to door, especially because most people shut the door in there. I don't have that kind of courage or commitment. I was wowed, and I didn't agree with anything that.
Yeah, and it's interesting because one of the things I talk about with my clients actually is, there's infinite data out there, infinite data. And you create your world by the data on which you choose to focus.
Yes, exactly right.
So you can focus on, and you'll get a lot of agreement. Oh God,
yes.
They're at the door. What? No,
yes.
no, and
yes.
you know, and you can make a case for that.
Yeah, there's evidence.
Yeah. Or you can go, oh my God, look what it took for them to do this.
Yes.
And you know, you write in the book also of you had a parishioner who would call you every Monday to complain about your Sunday sermon.
Yes.
And on the one hand, you know, the typical reaction is,
14 people told me it was wonderful. What's the matter with you?
Yeah, exactly. And you actually, you know, felt all of that. And, you know, again, it doesn't mean those negative thoughts don't show up, but you chose to say, thank you.
And I listened for the thank you. That's
yeah.
That's like a shortcut of being empowered by, you know, rather than agreement, I listened for the thank you. And if there's always a thank you underneath. If you look hard enough, okay, we don't usually look for the thank you. We listen for what's wrong, okay, instead of the thank you.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so then you talked about, I love this, where you asked this young man who came to you totally depressed and almost suicidal and not seeing any purpose in life,
yes.
like what's the meaning?
Yes.
And you asked him, when you're at your best, what 2 words are the expression of yourself? So say a little bit more about that.
There was this nice kid, Michael, came to my office 6 years ago. This was actually the inspiration for my book, this story. And I had a couch, and he slumped right over on the couch. He was with his mom. There was no appointment made. There was a desperation. Suicide was never mentioned, but it was in the space. So he just slumped over on the couch. I said, Michael, what's wrong? He talks just like, I don't know what my life is for. I don't get it. I flounder. I fluster. I don't have a purpose. And I wake up every day like that. And so I said to him, Michael, that's brilliant. You're 18 years old asking what your purpose is? That's absolutely brilliant. People go through their whole lives without asking that question, Michael. So I got his attention. So I said, Michael, you can't find your purpose. It's not in a bag in a ShopRite. You can't discover it either. You know, people say they want to discover themselves. No, it's not hidden under a rock outside in your garden. So St. Paul said once the spiritual journey is a creation, and Christ we're a new creation. So that's what I just made this all up. I said, Michael, when you're at your best, what 2 words would you use? And he thinks for a second, he goes, nice and kind. I said, boy, does the world ever need nice and kind, Michael. I drive a lot. I don't see it much out there. I love the simplicity of your words. That's your purpose. That's the Spirit of God in you, Michael. And the beautiful thing is, it doesn't matter what you get anymore, Michael. You're nice and kind waiting to happen. This was big for me. 2 weeks later, now this guy, verge of, you know, awful, he was an acolyte, and I leaned over during the service and I said, Michael, how are you? He goes, fabulous, just like that. And 6 years later, he's still fabulous. With his permission, on Easter Sunday, I said to my congregation, I walked down the aisle when I preached, I said, I want to put something in your head, folks. I talked a little about Michael, and I said, in one of his epistles, Jesus said, Paul said, in Christ we are new creation. I want to suggest to you, we don't live in the domain of creation, we live in the domain of reaction. And every single upset in your life and mine is a reaction to someone or something. I see this, Natasha, with kids that are doing fine until somebody posts nasty on Facebook and their well-being goes out the window. Or you meet some biatch in the bank, all right. I said, when you and I react and upset, we're victims of them. They're running the show. I said, don't you ever be a victim of anyone or anything. Jesus wasn't a victim even on the way to the cross. And I always give homework. I invited them, what are the 2 words that express the Spirit of God in you, and have it some form of service, you know. And you know, that sermon changed my life because I have not been upset in 6 years. My 2 words are loving and generous. Do I get nasty? All the time. And how do I be with I have a little prayer under my breath. God bless you. You seem so angry inside of your skin. We just show up on the radar screen. If you follow that person around who's angry, they're angry everywhere they go. But we take it personally. No, it's about them, not about us. And I also said this in the book, we all have 2 sides to us. We all have a wonderful side, and we all have our downside. And people will look in you what they find. That's about them, more about you, okay? Especially when there's something I don't like about you, well, that's what I've looked for. And that, again, is to bring worth to me when I can put you down, all right? But that's the secret I share in the book about not being upset. It's a reaction, and it's a victim. And I mentioned it to my cardiologist who's Jewish. He said there's a Jewish word for Yetzer Hara in the Bible, and that's your ego speaking. And that may, oh yeah, that is your ego.
Yeah.
So when I start to get mad at somebody for not using their blinkers, I just laugh at myself, because that's,
Yeah, and I think, again, it goes back to, you have to intentionally recontextualize.
Exactly
because
right.
As human beings, we're always going to get hooked.
Yes.
And again, it's just, okay, so what do I want to do with getting hooked? I can rah, 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 rah,
yes.
Or I can shift the context and say, okay, nice and kind. So how can I be nice and kind in this moment?
That's to be intentional, not reactional.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah. And I think it requires that, and I think it requires a commitment. But I think the whole idea of it is so powerful that, again, if you just start looking to how can I recontextualize it, you can change your life.
Yes, exactly right. So as I said, my 2 words are loving and generous. I tip the gas guy $5 wherever I go. I was at a gas station last week, and there was some desperate young gal in a big jalopy. I knew she didn't have any money, so I called the gasoline man over, and I paid for her gas. And it's like a win-win when you bring forth the Spirit of God. You get to experience the joy of the other.
Yeah.
And Jesus said that I've come to bring you joy. Make it complete by passing it on to someone else.
Yeah. And simple as that. Yeah. And it doesn't even have to be financial. It could be just noticing something and acknowledging someone. Yeah.
It's like I'll tell people how adorable their children are, or I tell all the time how generous.
So it's really operating as a contribution.
Yeah, exactly right. Exactly right. Generosity is contribution, and I've noticed this in my many years. Happiness and generosity go together.
Yes.
They go together.
Yeah.
And my youngest daughter has been divorced, and I told her, 2 important things to look for is a relationship with his mother and how generous he is. So when they're at the restaurant and he goes out to the bathroom, she checks to see what kind of tip he left. Okay. But generous. The happiest people I know are also the generous, the most generous, and that's my secret.
And on that note, we're at the end of our time.
Already? It seems like it's been 2 minutes.
I know, it does.
Wow.
Yeah, so thank you for coming. And, you're in Pompton Lakes, New Jersey.
Yes.
And people can get in touch with you and Christchurch,
Pompton. Also, we do a Facebook service that you can watch anytime.
Stephen Rozzelle.
Yeah. I got the copyright paperwork done last week, and now I'm self-publishing, and I don't know how, it'll be a few weeks before it's published. Great. But I've already had explosive, wonderful comments about
Fantastic.
the book.
Stephen, thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Natasha.
My name is Natasha Sherman. Thank you for joining us.